The lawyer cleared his throat and said my name like it was a mistake. Emily Carter, he read, looking up slowly, is the sole beneficiary of the estate. For a moment, no one breathed. Then my oldest brother slammed his palm on the polished oak table. That's not possible. That was the first time I understood something irreversible had begun. Before I tell you how this ended, or what it cost, pause for a second. If you've ever been treated like a guest in your own family, like love was conditional and silence was safer than truth, you might want to stay. Like, comment, subscribe if stories like this matter to you. Now let me take you back. My name is Emily Carter. I'm 31 years old, and I was adopted at 6. My adoptive parents, Jonathan Carter and Margaret Carter, found me through a closed adoption agency in Ohio. I don't remember the paperwork. I remember Margaret kneeling to my eye level and asking if I liked puzzles. I remember Jonathan carrying my suitcase like it weighed nothing. What I also remember, very clearly, are their biological sons. Andrew Carter was 14 when I arrived. Michael Carter was 12. From the first night, they made it clear I was temporary. A charity case. A replacement for something broken. Andrew ignored me. Michael mocked me. Together, they perfected the art of making me feel invisible while standing right there. My parents tried, in their way. Margaret corrected them gently. Jonathan said things like, "Give it time." Time never fixed it. It just taught me where not to step. I learned early to be useful, quiet, exceptional at school. I earned scholarships. I worked part-time jobs. I paid for my own books even when I didn't have to. Andrew went into finance. Michael drifted, dropped out of 2 programs, blamed everyone else. Still, they were sons. I was the addition. When Jonathan died suddenly of a heart attack, Margaret changed. She became sharper, more deliberate. She started writing things down, locking files, asking me questions about numbers, about logistics, about people. I was working then as a compliance analyst for a mid-sized insurance firm in Columbus. I dealt with regulations, audits, inconsistencies. I was good at it. I noticed patterns others missed. Margaret noticed that too. Michael noticed something else. "You think you're better than us now," he said once, during a Thanksgiving dinner where he'd already had too much wine. "No," I replied calmly. "I think I'm prepared." Andrew smiled at that, not kindly. After Margaret passed, the house went quiet in a way that felt wrong. Too clean, too empty. The funeral was large. Neighbors, colleagues, distant relatives. Andrew and Michael stood together. I stood alone. No one asked me how I was holding up. 2 weeks later, we sat in the office of Richard Bloom, my parents' estate attorney. That was where he read the will. Margaret had left me the house, the investment accounts, the remaining interest in a small manufacturing firm Jonathan had co-founded decades earlier. Andrew and Michael were each left a fixed sum. Significant, but nowhere near equal. The room turned cold. Michael laughed first. "This is a joke." Andrew leaned back in his chair. "She manipulated them. You know she did." I said nothing. Richard Bloom adjusted his glasses. The will was updated 18 months ago. Multiple witnesses, full capacity. Andrew stood. "We're contesting." And just like that, I lost my family for the second time. They filed within a week. Undue influence. Coercion, questionable mental state. They demanded access to everything. Bank records, emails, medical notes. They moved back into the house while the case was pending, claiming it was their childhood home. I stayed in my apartment and waited. That's what they didn't understand. Waiting is something I'm very good at. I reviewed documents late into the night. I mapped timelines. I noticed gaps. Jonathan's death certificate. The coroner's report. A medication he'd never taken before. Margaret's sudden changes to beneficiaries. Her encrypted emails. Her notes about protecting Emily. And then there was the night of the accident, the one the police ruled as natural. But nothing about it was simple. By the time the court hearing date arrived, my brothers thought this was about money. They were wrong. Because when you're adopted, you grow up understanding one thing very clearly. Belonging is never guaranteed. You earn it. Or you protect yourself. And sometimes, you outlast everyone else. That was the night I decided I wouldn't just keep what my parents left me. I would find out why they were so afraid to leave it to me in the first place, and what my brothers had done to make sure they never could. The first court filing arrived in a plain white envelope, thick enough to feel intentional. I opened it at my kitchen table, coffee untouched, sunlight cutting across the stack of papers like it was trying to warn me. Andrew Carter's name appeared first. Michael Carter's followed. Plaintiffs. The language was clinical. Undue influence. Emotional manipulation. Questionable capacity. They weren't saying Margaret was weak. They were saying I was dangerous. I folded the papers carefully and placed them in a folder labeled Estate. Inside were already bank statements Margaret had asked me to download for her months earlier, handwritten notes she'd left on yellow pads, and a flash drive she'd once pressed into my palm and told me to keep safe. At the time, I thought she was just being cautious. Now I understood she was preparing. The first hearing was set for 6 weeks later. Plenty of time, Andrew said in his email, for me to reconsider dragging this out. I didn't reply. Instead, I called a lawyer. Her name was Laura Mendel, a probate litigator based in downtown Columbus. We met in her office the next afternoon. She didn't smile much. I liked that. "Tell me about your family," she said, pen poised. I told her everything. Not emotionally, chronologically. Adoption, favoritism, education, my job, Margaret's decline, the will. Laura listened without interrupting. When I finished, she leaned back and said, "They're counting on you being grateful." "For what?" I asked. "For being chosen," she replied. Adopted children are expected to be compliant. Judges see that pattern too. "What are my chances?" I asked. She didn't sugarcoat it. "Contested wills are ugly, but your case isn't weak. Your mother updated her will with full documentation, medical clearance, independent witnesses. That matters." "And the brothers?" I asked. "They'll try to overwhelm you," Laura said, "emotionally, procedurally. They'll push discovery hard and hope you break." I nodded. "I won't." She steadied me for a moment. "Good, then we'll prepare." Preparation became my routine. I worked my job during the day and reviewed documents at night. Margaret had been meticulous. Dates, times, lists of phone calls, even a spreadsheet labeled access log, with names of people who had entered the house during Jonathan's final months. Andrew and Michael's names appeared more often than anyone else's. There was also something else. A pharmacy receipt from a chain Jonathan had never used, dated 3 days before his death. I flagged it. When I asked Laura about it, she frowned. "That's odd. Is it relevant?" I asked. "Only if it wasn't prescribed," she said. "But that opens another door." "Which one?" I asked. She met my eyes. "One you don't open unless you're ready." I was. Meanwhile, my brothers weren't subtle. Michael showed up at my apartment one evening, unannounced, smelling of alcohol and resentment. "You think you won," he said, leaning against the doorframe like he belonged there. "I didn't win anything," I replied. He laughed. "You think Mom loved you more than us?" "I think she trusted me," I said. That made his face change. "You always played the victim," he said. "Poor little orphan." I didn't flinch. "You're trespassing." He stared at me for a long moment, then stepped back. "This isn't over." "I know," I said. Andrew's approach was colder. He sent emails through his attorney, questioning every interaction I'd ever had with Margaret. He requested access to my work records, claiming I might have applied professional pressure. Laura shut that down quickly. "They're fishing," she told me, "and they don't like that you're not panicking." I wasn't panicking. I was remembering things. Margaret asking me to sit with her during Jonathan's last weeks because Andrew was too busy. Michael disappearing for hours when Jonathan was struggling with his medication schedule. Margaret whispering one night, "If anything happens to me, promise you won't give them what they don't deserve." At the time, I thought she meant money. Now, I wasn't so sure. 3 weeks before the hearing, Laura called me into her office again. "I pulled the pharmacy records," she said, sliding a document across the table. Jonathan was prescribed a beta blocker he'd never been on before, filled under an emergency authorization. "Who authorized it?" I asked. She pointed to the signature. "Michael Carter." My stomach didn't drop. It went still. "He wasn't a caregiver," I said. "No," Laura replied. "But he listed himself as one." The coroner's report had ruled the death natural. Heart failure. But beta blockers lower heart rate. In the wrong dosage, they can complicate an already weak heart. It's circumstantial, Laura said carefully. But it's not nothing. What do we do? I asked. We don't accuse, she said. We observe. We ask questions. And we watch how they react. The next deposition was Michael's. He was late, defensive, dismissive. When Laura asked about Jonathan's medication, he shrugged. Dad was confused. I helped. Were you instructed by a physician? Laura asked. I don't remember, he said. You signed the authorization, she replied. He shifted. Mom told me to. Margaret was already dead. That lie landed heavily. Andrew's deposition was smoother, controlled. He denied everything, claimed ignorance. But when asked why he'd accessed Margaret's email account after Jonathan's death, he hesitated. To help with finances, he said. Without power of attorney? Laura asked. Silence. The hearing loomed closer. At night, alone, I finally let myself feel it. Not grief. Resolve. I wasn't fighting for money. I was fighting for truth. Because Margaret hadn't chosen me out of pity. She'd chosen me because I saw what others ignored. And now, so did the court. The night before the hearing, I stood in the empty house for the first time since the funeral. The brothers had moved out temporarily, advised by their lawyers. I walked through rooms full of memories that weren't entirely mine. In Margaret's study, I found one last envelope tucked behind a bookshelf. It was addressed to me. Inside was a single sentence, written in her careful hand. They will try to rewrite the story. Don't let them. The next morning, as I dressed for court, I realized something that surprised me. I wasn't afraid, because no matter how this ended, I finally knew who I was in that family. Not the charity case, not the outsider, but the one they never saw coming. The courtroom was colder than it needed to be, not physically, emotionally. I sat at the defendant's table beside Laura Mendel, hands folded, posture still. Across the aisle, Andrew Carter and Michael Carter sat with their attorneys, shoulders squared, like this was a business negotiation, instead of a family dismantling itself in public. The judge entered. Judge Raymond Hollis, late 60s, careful eyes. The kind of man who didn't rush and didn't forget. Let's begin, he said. The opening statements were exactly what I expected. Andrew's attorney spoke first. He framed the case as concern, protection, a grieving family manipulated by an adopted daughter who had inserted herself during a vulnerable period. I didn't react. Michael stared at the table the entire time. When Laura stood, she didn't raise her voice. This is not a case of influence, she said. It's a case of intent. Margaret Carter knew precisely what she was doing, and she documented it thoroughly. She didn't mention the pharmacy. Not yet. The first witness was Dr. Helen Strauss, Margaret's primary care physician. Did Margaret Carter display signs of diminished capacity? Laura asked. No, Dr. Strauss replied. She was alert, oriented, and consistent. Did she discuss her estate plans with you? Laura continued. Yes, the doctor said. She was clear about her reasons. Andrew's attorney objected. Judge Hollis overruled. What reasons? Laura asked. Dr. Strauss paused. She said Emily had proven reliable, that she trusted her judgment. I felt Andrew shift beside his lawyer. The next witness was Richard Bloom, the estate attorney. He confirmed timelines, witnesses, independent evaluations. This will was not rushed, Richard said. It was deliberate. Michael's attorney tried to suggest Margaret had been isolated. Laura responded calmly. Is it unusual for adult children to be less present than a caregiver who lives nearby? Richard shook his head. Not at all. Then it was my turn. I took the stand without drama. Laura asked me to state my name and occupation. Emily Carter, I said. Compliance analyst. She asked about my relationship with Margaret. She trusted me, I said. We talked often. About finances, about boundaries. Did you ask her to change her will? Laura asked. No. Did you threaten her, pressure her, or mislead her? She continued. No. Then Andrew's attorney stood. Ms. Carter, he said, smiling thinly. Isn't it true that you benefited significantly from this will? Yes, I replied. And you don't believe that raised concerns among the biological children, he pressed. I believe their concerns began long before the will, I said. Objection. Overruled. He tried another angle. You were adopted, he said. Do you believe that made you more eager to secure your position in the family? The question landed like it was meant to wound. I didn't flinch. I believe being adopted taught me not to assume belonging, I said. It taught me to observe. There was a murmur in the room. He asked about my job, suggested I'd used my professional skills to manipulate records. Laura shut that down fast. When I stepped down, my pulse was steady. Then Laura called Michael Carter. Michael walked to the stand like he was bored. Laura asked about Jonathan's health. Was your father on new medication shortly before his death? She asked. I think so, Michael said. Did you authorize that medication? Laura asked. Michael hesitated. I helped. Did a physician instruct you to? She pressed. I don't remember. Laura didn't argue. She moved on. Did your mother ask you to manage Jonathan's medication? She asked. Michael shook his head. No. Then why did you sign as caregiver? Laura asked. Silence. Andrew's attorney objected. Judge Hollis allowed the question. Michael cleared his throat. I was trying to help. Laura nodded once, then sat. She didn't push, because the point had landed. Andrew's testimony came next. He was polished, controlled, denied knowledge, claimed distance. When Laura asked about his access to Margaret's email account, he said, She asked me to help. Did she provide written authorization? Laura asked. No, Andrew said. Did she ask you to review personal correspondence? Laura continued. No. Then why did you log in multiple times after Jonathan's death? Laura asked. Andrew paused. To make sure nothing was missed, he said. Judge Hollis leaned forward slightly. That pause mattered. Court adjourned for the day, with no ruling. Outside, reporters waited. Andrew spoke briefly. Michael avoided cameras. I said nothing. That night, I returned to the house again. Not to remember, to verify. Margaret had always kept her documents in order. But Jonathan had been less careful. In the garage, behind old boxes, I found a small lockbox I didn't recognize. Inside were bank statements from a joint account Jonathan had once shared with Andrew. Withdrawals increased sharply in the months before his death. Cash withdrawals. I scanned everything and sent it to Laura. She called me immediately. This changes things, she said. What does it mean? I asked. It means the will dispute isn't the only issue, she replied. It suggests motive. For what? I asked, though I already knew. She didn't answer directly. It suggests your brothers had reasons beyond inheritance to control the narrative, she said. The next hearing was scheduled for the following week, but something else happened first. The police called. A detective named Samuel Ortiz requested a meeting. Not formal, informational. When we met, he didn't accuse. He asked about Jonathan, about Michael, about the medication. We're reviewing some old files, he said. I nodded. I understand. He looked at me carefully. If you remember anything unusual, anything you dismissed at the time, now would be the moment. I thought of the night Jonathan collapsed. Michael had been there. Andrew had arrived later. Margaret had been in shock. I told him everything. When I left, my phone buzzed. A message from Andrew. You're crossing a line. I didn't respond, because lines are only invisible to people who've never been pushed across one. That night, as I lay awake, I finally understood the full shape of the fight. The will wasn't the beginning, it was the cover. And whatever truth was buried beneath Jonathan's death, my brothers had underestimated one thing. I wasn't trying to take something from them. I was trying to stop them from hiding it. And once that door opened, it wouldn't matter who was adopted and who wasn't. It would matter who told the truth. Detective Samuel Ortiz didn't wear intimidation the way some officers did. He wore patience. We met again 2 days later. This time at a small interview room inside the county building. No tape recorder on the table, just a legal pad, a pen, and his eyes following details most people missed. Let's go back to the night Jonathan Carter died, he said. I took a breath. Not to steady myself, to focus. It was a Thursday, I said, March 14th. He'd been tired all day, short of breath. Who was with him? Ortiz asked. Michael Carter, I replied. Andrew arrived later. Where were you? He asked. At my apartment, I said. Margaret called me after the ambulance left. Ortiz nodded, writing slowly. Do you remember anything unusual about Michael's behavior in the weeks before that night? He asked. I didn't rush to answer. Yes, I said finally. He was suddenly very involved, insisted on handling medication, wouldn't let nurses stay late. Ortiz looked up. Was that new? Yes, I said. He'd never shown interest before. What about Andrew? Ortiz asked. He was focused on finances, I said. Accounts, transfers. He said he was helping Mom. Ortiz flipped a page. Did Margaret ever express fear? He asked. The word hung between us. Yes, I said. Not explicitly. But she became careful. She locked things away. She asked me to document conversations. What kind of conversations? He asked. With Andrew and Michael, I replied. Arguments. Pressure. Ortiz stopped writing. Pressure to do what? He asked. To change things, I said. To keep the estate predictable. Predictable for whom? He asked. For them, I said. When the meeting ended, Ortiz didn't say much. He stood, nodded once, and said, "Thank you for being precise." That mattered more than reassurance. By the time I got home, Laura Mendel had already left me a voicemail. "They're rattled," she said. Andrew's attorney requested a continuance. I called her back immediately. "Why?" I asked. "They claim new information requires review," she replied. Which usually means they're trying to slow momentum. "Do we oppose?" I asked. "We don't," she said. "Let them think time helps." It didn't. The next day, Andrew sent a group email to me, to Michael, to Laura. Subject: Family Resolution. "Emily," he wrote, "this has escalated beyond what Mom would have wanted. We should resolve this privately. I propose mediation." Michael replied within minutes. "This is getting out of hand." I didn't reply at all. Laura did. "All communication should proceed through counsel." That was when Andrew made a mistake. He forwarded the email chain to someone he shouldn't have. Margaret's former accountant, Eleanor Price. Eleanor didn't reply to Andrew. She called Laura. "I've been waiting for someone to ask the right questions," Eleanor said. We met her the following afternoon. She was in her 70s. Sharp. Unimpressed by bravado. "I handled the Carters books for 15 years, she said. Jonathan was careful. Margaret was thorough. Andrew was ambitious. And Michael? Laura asked. Eleanor smiled thinly. Michael was reckless. She slid a folder across the table. Inside were reconciliations Andrew had asked her to adjust. Reclassifications. Timing changes. He said it was temporary, Eleanor said. To smooth things. Did Margaret know? I asked. Eleanor shook her head. No. And when she found out, she terminated my services. Not out of anger. Out of fear. Fear. That word again. Laura copied everything. By the end of the week, Detective Ortiz requested Eleanor's records formally. Andrew's attorney filed another motion, this time to suppress evidence related to Jonathan's death. The judge denied it. The will hearing resumed with a different energy. Judge Hollis looked less patient. Laura introduced the new financial evidence. Andrew's lawyer objected. Repeatedly. Judge Hollis overruled. Repeatedly. Michael was sweating. When Laura asked him about cash withdrawals from the joint account, he snapped. That money was Dad's, he said. We were entitled to it. Before his death, Laura asked. Yes, Michael said. Even without his knowledge? She pressed. Silence. Andrew tried to interject. The judge shut him down. Mr. Carter, Judge Hollis said, looking directly at Andrew. You will remain silent unless addressed. Andrew's face hardened. That afternoon, during recess, Andrew approached me in the hallway. You're enjoying this, he said quietly. No, I replied. I'm enduring it. You don't belong here, he said. You never did. I met his eyes. You're right, I said. I built my place elsewhere. That was the last thing I said to him, without witnesses. The next morning, the police reopened Jonathan Carter's death inquiry. It wasn't an accusation. It was a review. But reviews come with subpoenas. Michael didn't show up to court that day. His attorney cited illness. Andrew sat alone. Judge Hollis postponed the will ruling, pending the outcome of the investigation. Outside, cameras waited. This time, Andrew didn't speak. That night, I returned to the house one last time. I walked through the rooms slowly. Not as a daughter. Not as an heir. As a witness. In Jonathan's old study, I noticed something I'd missed before. A dent in the wood beside his chair. Like something heavy had fallen. A pill bottle rolled under the desk. Not the beta blocker. Something else. I picked it up carefully. Unlabeled. Empty. My phone buzzed as I stood there. A text from Michael. You think you're smart. You have no idea what you're doing. I looked at the message for a long time. Then I placed the bottle in an evidence bag Laura had given me days earlier. I didn't reply, because for the first time, the fear in this family wasn't mine. It had changed hands. Michael disappeared for 4 days. No court appearance, no statements, no calls returned. His attorney filed a notice claiming medical distress, but the wording was vague, carefully non-committal. Andrew stayed silent, which was new. Silence from him usually meant calculation. Detective Samuel Ortiz called me on the second day. "We've secured a warrant for medical records," he said, "and we're reopening interviews." "For Michael?" I asked. "For everyone," he replied, "including you." "I understand," I said. "You did the right thing bringing in the bottle," he added. "We sent it to the lab." "What are they testing for?" I asked. "Anything that shouldn't have been there," he said. That was enough. The house felt different once the investigation turned official. Not haunted. Exposed. The kind of exposure that makes every sound sharper. I stopped going there unless Laura asked me to retrieve something specific. Instead, I focused on work. Normalcy matters when everything else is unstable. But even normalcy had begun to fray. Andrew filed an emergency motion requesting immediate possession of the house, citing deterioration of the property and risk to the estate. He wanted me locked out before the police finished their work. Laura countered within hours. "Pattern of interference," she said over the phone. "And now obstruction." "Will it work?" I asked. "No," she said, "but it tells us how desperate he is." The mediation Andrew had proposed weeks earlier was suddenly back on the table. This time, his attorney requested it formally. Laura forwarded the request with one line: "Your call." I thought about Margaret's note. "Don't let them rewrite the story." "I'll attend," I said, "but not to settle." The mediation took place in a conference room with windows that didn't open. The mediator, Thomas Green, introduced himself with practiced neutrality. Andrew arrived early. Michael did not attend. Andrew looked thinner, tired around the eyes. The confidence was still there, but it was strained, like a suit that no longer fit. "This doesn't have to be adversarial," he began. "It already is," I replied. He sighed. "Mom made mistakes. Dad made mistakes. We all did." "You did," I said. "I didn't." The mediator cleared his throat. "Perhaps we can focus on resolution." Andrew leaned forward. "We're willing to revise the distribution." "How?" I asked. "Equal shares," he said. "Sell the house, liquidate the firm, split it." "No," I said. His jaw tightened. "You'd walk away from peace?" "I'd walk away from silence," I replied. He stared at me, then lowered his voice. "If you keep pushing, things will come out." "They already are," I said. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You think you know everything." "I think I know enough," I replied. The mediator looked between us. "It seems mediation may not be productive at this time." Andrew stood abruptly. "Then you leave us no choice." I met his gaze. "You've had choices all along." We left without agreement. That afternoon, Laura received the preliminary lab report. "It's not conclusive yet," she said, "but there are traces of digoxin." I felt the word before I understood it. "That's a heart medication," I said. "Yes," she replied. "And it wasn't prescribed to Jonathan." Digoxin increases heart contraction. In the wrong dosage, it can be lethal, especially in someone already compromised. "It explains the sudden collapse," Laura said carefully. "And the beta blocker could have masked symptoms." My hands went cold. "Who would have access?" I asked. "Anyone managing medication," she said. "Michael." The police moved quickly after that. They interviewed Andrew again, this time with different questions. Financial ones, timelines, pressure points. They located Michael 2 days later at a friend's place outside Dayton. He refused to speak without counsel. That refusal spoke loudly. Court resumed with a different tone. Judge Hollis acknowledged the ongoing investigation and limited the scope of the will proceedings accordingly. The estate would remain frozen. No transfers, no possession changes. Andrew objected. Loudly. Judge Hollis shut him down. Outside the courthouse, Andrew confronted me again. "You've destroyed this family," he said. "No," I replied. "You tried to." His face twisted. "You don't even know where you come from." "I know exactly where I stand," I said. He laughed bitterly. "You think Mom loved you more." "I think she trusted me more," I said. "There's a difference." That night, Detective Ortiz called again. "We have enough to proceed," he said, "but it's going to take time." "I'm not in a hurry," I replied. He hesitated. "You should be prepared for backlash." "I am," I said. The backlash came quietly. An anonymous tip to my employer, questioning my ethics. A sudden audit request. Laura handled it. My employer stood by me. People were watching and choosing. The firm Jonathan had co-founded suspended Andrew's board privileges pending review. Investors asked questions he couldn't answer without implicating himself. Michael was charged with tampering related to medication handling. Not homicide. Not yet. But charges have gravity. They pull everything toward them. One evening, sorting through Margaret's study again with Laura present, we found something else. A voicemail saved on an old device. Margaret's voice. Tired. Afraid. "If anything happens to Jonathan," she said, "it won't be an accident. Please remember that." The message ended abruptly. Laura closed her eyes. "This changes everything," she said. "Can it be used?" I asked. "Yes," she replied. "And it will be." When I got home that night, I sat in the dark and let the quiet settle. This wasn't revenge. It was accounting. Every action had a cost. Every lie left a trace. The brothers had believed the story would protect them. They were wrong, because stories unravel when the truth keeps records. The answer arrived on a Thursday morning, wrapped in language meant to sound neutral. Detective Samuel Ortiz called while I was at my desk at work. He didn't waste time. The lab confirmed it, he said. Digoxin toxicity. Levels inconsistent with therapeutic use. I closed my eyes, not in shock, but in recognition. "So it wasn't natural," I said. "No," Ortiz replied. "And it wasn't accidental." I thanked him and ended the call. Then I sat there, hands flat on the desk, listening to the quiet hum of the office around me. Phones ringing, keyboards tapping. Normal life continuing, indifferent to the fact that my father's death had just been reclassified as suspicious. By the end of the day, Andrew knew. He showed up at my apartment that evening, for the second time in my life. And this time, he didn't pretend he belonged there. "You went to the police," he said as soon as I opened the door. I answered questions. I replied. "You set Michael up," he snapped. "No," I said calmly. Michael set himself up. Andrew's jaw clenched. "You think this ends with him?" "I think it ends with the truth," I said. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You have no idea what you're dragging up." "I do," I replied. "And I'm done protecting you from it." He stared at me for a long moment, then laughed once, sharply. "You were never one of us," he said. "I know," I replied. "That's why I survived you." He left without another word. The following week unraveled quickly. Michael Carter was formally charged with reckless endangerment and evidence tampering. Not murder. Not yet. But the language in the filing was careful, deliberate, the kind that leaves doors open. Andrew was questioned again, this time under caution. The firm Jonathan had co-founded placed him on indefinite leave, pending investigation into financial irregularities. His access to company systems was suspended. His name quietly removed from upcoming announcements. The will case stalled completely. Judge Raymond Hollis issued an order freezing all proceedings until the criminal investigation concluded. The estate remained intact, untouched, waiting. For the first time since Margaret's death, I wasn't reacting. I was watching. Laura Mendel kept me grounded. "This part is slow," she warned, "and ugly. Let it be." I did. Michael's attorney attempted to suppress the lab results. Failed. Andrew's attorney requested separate representation. That alone spoke volumes. Then, something unexpected happened. Andrew asked to meet me, not through lawyers, not through emails, in person. Against Laura's advice, I agreed, on one condition: public place, cameras, witnesses. We met at a cafe near the courthouse. Andrew arrived early, seated with his back to the wall. He looked smaller somehow. Not physically, structurally. "I need you to understand something," he said once we sat down. "I understand enough," I replied. "No," he said. "You don't understand, Michael." "I don't need to," I said. "I understand what he did." Andrew exhaled slowly. "He didn't plan to kill Dad." "Intent doesn't erase outcome," I replied. Andrew's hands tightened around his cup. He panicked. Dad was declining. There were debts. The firm was exposed. Michael thought stabilizing him would buy time. "You're describing control," I said, "not care." Andrew looked at me then, really looked at me. "You think you're better than us," he said quietly. "No," I replied. "I think I'm accountable." That was when he broke. Not dramatically, just enough. He was going to change the will, Andrew said. Dad. He wanted to revise things, equalize. Mom convinced him to wait. "And?" I asked. "And Michael couldn't afford that," Andrew said. Neither could I. The confession sat between us. I didn't record it. I didn't interrupt. "I didn't touch the medication," Andrew said quickly. "But I knew Michael was managing it. I didn't stop him." "Complicity has weight," I said. He nodded. "I know." When we stood to leave, he said one last thing. "She really loved you," he said. "Mom." "I know," I replied. That was the end of the conversation. 2 days later, Andrew was named in a civil investigation related to financial misconduct. The accountant's records had done their work. Michael was denied bail adjustment. The media shifted tone. Not sensational, cautious. But the word adopted no longer appeared as a qualifier. I was named as daughter, heir, witness. At night, alone, I finally allowed myself to grieve Jonathan, not as a perfect man, but as someone who had trusted the wrong people too long. Margaret had seen it sooner. That was why she had chosen me, not out of love alone, out of foresight. The voicemail she left became central evidence, not proof of murder, proof of fear. And fear has context. By the end of the month, the prosecutor announced intent to pursue enhanced charges, pending further review. Laura called me that evening. "This will take time," she said. "And it will get louder." "I can handle loud," I replied. "I grew up invisible." She smiled softly. "Then you'll be fine." I looked around my apartment, at the life I had built quietly, deliberately, without inheritance or assurance. For the first time, I felt something unexpected. Relief. Not because justice was guaranteed, but because the truth was no longer buried. It was moving. And once truth starts moving, it doesn't ask permission to keep going. Fallout doesn't arrive all at once. It leaks. First into conversations that stop when you enter the room. Then into meetings that suddenly require agendas. Then into decisions made without the people who used to make them. Andrew felt it before Michael did. Michael was locked into his own narrow reality. Court dates, attorneys, bail hearings. He still believed this was a misunderstanding that could be argued away. Andrew knew better. He called me again 3 days after our meeting at the cafe. This time, he didn't ask to see me. He asked for something else. "I need you to stop cooperating," he said. I didn't pretend I hadn't heard him. "No," I replied. "You don't understand what this is doing," he said. "To the firm, to Mom's name." "I understand exactly what it's doing," I said. "It's telling the truth." There was silence on the line. "You always wanted to belong," he said finally. "This is how you chose to do it?" "I never wanted to belong," I replied. "I wanted to be safe." He hung up. The next day, the manufacturing firm Jonathan had co-founded released a statement confirming Andrew's resignation from the board, effective immediately. No farewell, no gratitude, just distance. Michael's case escalated quietly. The prosecutor added a charge related to unlawful administration of medication. Still not murder. Still careful. But careful doesn't mean forgiving. Detective Samuel Ortiz called again. "We've uncovered communications between your brothers," he said. "Text messages, emails." "About what?" I asked. "About the will," he replied. "About timing. About keeping things stable." "Before or after Jonathan died?" I asked. "Both," he said. That mattered. Laura Mendel reviewed the transcripts with me that afternoon. She didn't comment right away. She let me read. Michael complaining about pressure. Andrew talking about optics. About delay. About managing outcomes. There was one line that stood out. "If Dad holds on another 6 months, this all goes away." 6 months would have put Jonathan past the date of the revised will. I closed the folder. "They knew," I said. "They suspected," Laura corrected. "That's enough." The will case resumed briefly, just to formalize what everyone already knew. Judge Raymond Hollis ruled that the will stood as written. No redistribution, no revision. He cited Margaret's clarity, Jonathan's intent, and the lack of credible evidence supporting undue influence. Andrew didn't object. Michael wasn't present. The house was officially mine. Not symbolically, legally, but ownership didn't feel like victory. It felt like responsibility. When I walked through it after the ruling, the rooms felt quieter than before. Not empty. Resolved. I began the process of securing documents, digitizing records, and closing accounts that had been left open for too long. Margaret had been careful, but she hadn't been ruthless. I was learning how to be both. 2 weeks later, the prosecutor made an announcement. They would not pursue homicide charges at this time. Instead, Michael Carter would face charges related to reckless endangerment, unlawful medication administration, and obstruction. Some people were disappointed. I wasn't. Justice isn't always symmetrical. It's contextual. Michael would live with what he'd done, publicly, permanently. Andrew's consequences were quieter. The civil investigation into his financial conduct expanded. Former colleagues distanced themselves. Clients withdrew. He didn't go to prison. He lost credibility. In his world, that was worse. My mother's sister, Elaine Parker, reached out unexpectedly. She'd always been polite, but distant. One of those relatives who watches from the edges. I should have said something sooner, she told me over lunch. Margaret was scared. Of what? I asked. Of being overruled, Elaine said. Of being told she was dramatic. Of being ignored. That tracked. She trusted you because you listened, Elaine added. That was the pattern no one wanted to acknowledge. Listening changes things. The media interest faded as the story grew less dramatic and more procedural. That was fine. I didn't want attention. I wanted closure. Michael accepted a plea deal. 12 months suspended. Mandatory supervision. Professional restrictions. Public record. He did not apologize. Andrew sent one last email. I hope this was worth it. I didn't reply. Because worth implies trade. And this wasn't a trade. It was a reckoning. On a quiet Sunday afternoon, I found myself sitting in Margaret's old garden, pruning roses she'd planted years earlier. She'd once told me roses need boundaries to grow straight. Too much freedom, and they collapse. Too much control, and they never bloom. I thought about that often now. My brothers had tried to control everything. They lost it all. I had learned to set boundaries and kept what mattered. The past couldn't be fixed, but it could be named. That was the difference. Forgiveness is a word people like to use when the worst part is already over. They say it like it's a finish line. Like once you forgive, the story ends cleanly. That isn't how it works. For me, forgiveness didn't arrive as a decision. It arrived as a problem I couldn't avoid anymore. The house was quiet, in a way that no longer felt temporary. The court papers were filed. The locks were changed. The estate accounts were consolidated under my name. The phone stopped ringing, and that was when the silence became loud. I woke up one morning convinced I'd forgotten something critical. A deadline, a form, a mistake that would undo everything I'd fought to secure. There was nothing. That was the unsettling part. When your entire adult life has been built around anticipation and defense, peace feels like negligence. I filled the space the only way I knew how, with work. Margaret's study became my office. I installed new shelves, upgraded the computer, cataloged decades of files she'd kept meticulously labeled, but never digitized. I worked 10-hour days, organizing a past that no longer needed me to protect it. That's where I found the notebook. It was tucked inside a drawer beneath old stationery and canceled checks. A slim, leather-bound journal with a cracked spine. No title, no dates on the cover. I recognized the handwriting immediately. Margaret's. She hadn't written in it daily. There were gaps. Weeks, months, sometimes years. But when she did write, it was deliberate. The first page I opened to wasn't about the will. It wasn't about my brothers. It was about me. She wrote that she worried about whether she'd done enough to make me feel chosen. Not rescued, not tolerated, chosen. I sat on the floor with my back against the desk and read until my legs went numb. She wrote about Andrew's distance, Michael's volatility, about how motherhood didn't erase imbalance, it only revealed it. About how she feared the boys would never see me as equal, only as a variable they couldn't control. There was a line I read twice. I did not protect her early enough. I will not make that mistake again. The notebook didn't absolve anyone. It didn't explain away the damage, but it did something more important. It made the truth undeniable. Margaret hadn't been confused. She hadn't been manipulated. She had been decisive. That knowledge changed how the weight sat on my chest. I called Laura Mendel that afternoon, not as my attorney, but as someone who'd watched the case from the inside. I don't feel relieved, I told her. I feel late. That's normal, she said. You're grieving in reverse. She explained that most people grieve loss first, then process betrayal. I was doing it the other way around. I'd been fighting so hard to defend the present that I hadn't mourned the past. You don't owe forgiveness, Laura said, but you do owe yourself understanding. Understanding meant sitting with memories I'd spent years flattening. Andrew correcting my grammar at dinner. Michael making jokes about my temper when I set boundaries. Margaret watching quietly, intervening only when lines were crossed too publicly to ignore. I'd grown up believing I was difficult. That belief didn't come from nowhere. It was taught. Forgiveness didn't mean excusing them. It meant reclaiming myself from the narrative they'd built around me. That realization came into focus the day Andrew showed up at the house, unannounced. I saw him through the window before he knocked. Standing on the walkway, hands in his pockets, posture stiff. Smaller than I remembered. I didn't rush to answer. When I did, I didn't invite him inside. "What do you want?" I asked. He looked past me into the house. "I just wanted to see it," he said. "One last time." "No," I replied. "You wanted to see if it still felt like yours." He flinched. "I lost everything," he said. "No," I said calmly. "You lost access." There was a difference. "I didn't think it would go this far," he said. "I thought we could fix it." "Fix what?" I asked. He hesitated. That told me everything. "You don't know," I said. "That's the problem." He asked if I hated him. I didn't answer right away. Hate would have been easier. "I don't hate you," I said finally. "I just don't carry you anymore." That landed harder than anger ever could. He nodded once, stepped back, and left without another word. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with the notebook open, reading Margaret's final entry. She wrote that love isn't proven by sacrifice. It's proven by consistency. By showing up the same way when no one is watching. I closed the notebook and felt something loosen. Not forgiveness. Release. There was still one thing left undone. Something that hadn't surfaced in court. Something buried beneath paperwork and procedure. The detective had mentioned it once, then never again. A discrepancy in the timing of the emergency call the night Jonathan died. At the time, it felt secondary. Now, it felt unfinished. Closure doesn't always come from justice. Sometimes it comes from clarity. And clarity, I was learning, has a way of asking for one last look. The file was thinner than I expected. That was the first thing that unsettled me. When Detective Samuel Ortiz handed it across the metal desk in his precinct office, it didn't have the weight of something unfinished. It looked like something already decided. "Officially," he said, leaning back in his chair, "this case is closed." I didn't touch the folder. "Officially doesn't interest me," I said. "Accuracy does." Ortiz studied my face for a moment. He'd been the one to notify us the night Jonathan and Margaret died. He'd stood in the rain, hat soaked through, voice careful. He remembered me. "You're not asking as a daughter," he said. "You're asking like someone who knows how systems fail." I met his eyes. "Because they do." He slid the folder closer. "Then you should know what you're looking for." The accident report confirmed what we'd been told. 2-car collision on Route 19. Weather conditions, poor. No signs of intoxication. No mechanical failure detected. But the emergency call log was different. The 911 call was placed at 9:42 p.m. The estimated time of impact was 9:31. 11 minutes. I tapped the page. Why the delay? Ortiz exhaled slowly. That's the part that never sat right. He explained that a passing driver had made the call. Someone who claimed they'd just come upon the wreck. No dashcam footage. No phone data preserved. The caller declined to stay on scene. "Which is unusual," Ortiz said. "Most people wait." "Did you ever identify them?" I asked. He hesitated. "We traced the phone to a prepaid device. No registration." I closed the folder. 11 minutes doesn't sound like much. unless you know trauma response times, unless you know that early intervention saves lives, unless you know that Margaret always wore her seatbelt and Jonathan never sped. I thanked Ortiz and left without asking permission to dig deeper. I didn't need it. The first person I called was Laura Mendel. "Don't go down this road alone," she said immediately. "I'm not," I replied. "I just need to know who benefits if this stays buried." That answer came faster than I expected. Michael. He'd been in town that night. He'd told the court he'd arrived the next morning, but credit card records showed a hotel charge at 8:47 p.m., less than 5 miles from the crash site. I stared at the timestamp until my vision blurred. Andrew had been desperate. Michael had been angry. Neither of them had expected scrutiny. "I didn't accuse," I observed. "I requested security footage from the gas station across from the hotel." Laura handled the subpoena quietly, professionally. The footage showed Michael leaving the hotel at 9:20 p.m., getting into his car, heading south. Route 19 runs south. When I saw the timestamp on his return, my hands went cold. 9:55 p.m. He didn't stop. He didn't call. He drove back, parked, and went inside. I didn't feel rage. I felt confirmation. That night, I listened to the voicemail he'd left me after the funeral. The one where he said, "Some things just happen. Don't dig." I understood now that it wasn't advice. It was a warning. Laura met me the next morning with her face already set. "This changes the estate case," she said. "But it also opens something criminal." "I don't want revenge," I said. She nodded. "I know. You want truth. Truth has a cost." It cost Michael his freedom. When the investigators confronted him, he didn't deny being there. He claimed panic, claimed he thought they were already gone, claimed he didn't know what to do. What he didn't expect, Ortiz told me later, was the data trail. Phones record movement even when calls aren't made. Cars remember. Michael was charged with leaving the scene of a fatal accident. Andrew was cleared of involvement. That didn't absolve him. It just defined him. The arraignment wasn't publicized heavily. No cameras, no statements. I didn't attend. I watched from my living room as the news scrolled across the screen. Former local businessman charged in connection with fatal crash. They didn't say brother. They didn't say family. And for the first time, that separation felt merciful. Andrew called me that night. He didn't speak at first. "I didn't know," he said finally. "I believe you," I replied. That surprised him. "I didn't know," he repeated, voice cracking. "I know," I said. "But you still chose sides." Silence stretched. "What do you want from me?" he asked. I thought about it. "Nothing," I said. "That's the point." When the call ended, I felt something close to peace. Not satisfaction. Alignment. Margaret's notebook sat on the table beside me. I opened to the last page again. She'd written about legacy, not money, not property, but the courage to tell the truth even when it fractures the family. I understood now why she trusted me, why the will was written the way it was, why silence had never been her lesson. If this story resonates with you, if you've ever been told to stay quiet for the sake of peace, you already know how this ends. You don't need permission to choose clarity. You just need the moment where you stop protecting everyone else. If you're still listening, stay with me. There's one chapter left, and it isn't about them anymore. I closed the notebook. Outside, the house stood solid. Inside, so did I. The day Michael entered his plea, the sky stayed stubbornly clear. No thunder, no rain. No cinematic justice, just a quiet courthouse and a man finally facing a room that didn't bend for him. I didn't attend the hearing, but I read the transcript later that night, sitting at the dining table where Margaret used to sort mail. The language was clinical. Charge, negligence, failure to render aid. Each word precise, each word heavy. Michael pled not guilty. That didn't surprise me. What surprised me was how little it mattered. The case moved forward without my involvement. Evidence had weight all on its own. Phone pings, vehicle data, surveillance timestamps. The kind of truth that doesn't argue or raise its voice. It just exists. Andrew texted me once that week. "I'm sorry doesn't fix anything, but I'm saying it anyway." I read it, then set the phone down without replying. Some apologies arrive after the damage is done. Not to heal, but to ease the person giving them. I didn't owe him relief. What I owed myself was space. I took a week away from the house. Not a vacation. A pause. I stayed in a small rental near the coast, somewhere quiet where nobody knew my last name. I walked early in the mornings. I cooked simple meals. I slept without waking up braced for impact. Grief didn't show up as sadness. It showed up as exhaustion. When you spend years being vigilant, stillness feels like collapse. My body finally understood that it was allowed to rest, and it took full advantage. On the fourth day, I dreamed of Margaret. She was standing in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, hands dusted with flour. She didn't speak. She just nodded, once, the way she did when something was finally settled. I woke up calm. When I returned home, the house didn't feel haunted anymore. It felt inhabited. I made changes that weren't about erasing memory, but about claiming the present. I repainted the study. I donated clothes that didn't fit the life I was building. I planted herbs in the backyard the way Jonathan always said he would, but never did. Life didn't reset. It resumed. The estate business wrapped up quietly. Accounts closed. Titles transferred. The trust finalized. I signed the last document on a Thursday afternoon, alone in Laura Mendel's office. She slid the folder across the desk and smiled. Not celebratory, just steady. "You protected what they intended," she said. "No," I replied. "I honored it." There's a difference. That evening, Andrew showed up again. This time, I let him inside. We sat across from each other in the living room, the space between us carefully maintained. He looked older than he had months ago. Not from age, from recognition. "I'm moving," he said. "Out of state." I nodded. "I needed to tell you," he added, "before I go." "You've told me," I said. He swallowed. "I keep thinking there's something I should say that would make this right." "There isn't," I said gently. "But you can still make it honest." He nodded slowly, as if that cost him something. "I didn't protect you," he said. "Not when it mattered." "No," I agreed. "You didn't." Silence settled. Not awkward, just final. When he stood to leave, he paused at the door. "I hope you're okay," he said. "I am," I replied, "because I stopped waiting for you to be better." That truth landed cleanly. After he left, I sat in the quiet and let the day close around me. Justice didn't arrive as fireworks or applause. It arrived as clarity. I no longer wondered what I could have done differently. I no longer replayed conversations looking for better words. The past stopped demanding revision. Michael's trial date was set for early fall. I wasn't required to testify. The evidence spoke without me. That, too, was a kind of release. I focused on building something forward-facing. I accepted a consulting contract that Margaret had once suggested I pursue, but never pushed. I worked hours that felt chosen, not imposed. I began seeing a therapist, not because I was broken, but because I wanted language for what I'd survived. For the slow erosion of worth that comes from being tolerated instead of embraced. She told me something that stayed with me. "Families don't just shape us by what they give," she said. "They shape us by what they withhold." Understanding that didn't make the loss disappear. It made it comprehensible. On a Sunday afternoon in late summer, I opened Margaret's notebook one last time. I didn't read it straight through. I didn't need to. I stopped on a page I hadn't noticed before. It was short. "If she ever doubts herself, tell her this was never an accident. Love is not random. I chose her every day." I closed the notebook and placed it back in the drawer. Some truths don't need to be revisited. They need to be lived. As the trial approached, people began to ask questions again. Distant relatives, old neighbors, curiosity dressed as concern. I didn't engage. I had learned that explanation is optional. You don't owe everyone the map to your healing. The house felt different now, not because it was quieter, but because it was aligned. Nothing inside it contradicted who I was becoming. I had lost a family. I had kept myself. And that balance, fragile as it once seemed, was no longer negotiable. There was still one chapter left to live through. One that didn't belong to courtrooms, or documents, or inherited conflict. It belonged to the life that starts when you stop surviving and begin choosing. That chapter was already unfolding. I just hadn't named it yet. The trial didn't change my life. That surprised people. They expected a verdict to feel like a turning point, like the final stamp that made everything official. But by the time Michael sat in that courtroom, My life had already shifted out of his reach. I didn't attend the first day. Or the second. On the third day, Laura Mendel called me and said, "You don't need to be here, but today is when the story hardens." So I went. The courthouse smelled like disinfectant and old paper. The benches were uncomfortable by design. Nothing about the place invited lingering. Michael sat at the defense table in a navy suit that didn't quite fit him anymore. He looked smaller. Not fragile, just reduced. Andrew wasn't there. Neither were any extended relatives. I took a seat in the back row. Michael didn't turn around. The prosecutor laid out the timeline calmly. No dramatics, no raised voice. Just facts stacked one on top of the other, until denial had nowhere left to stand. Phone location data, vehicle telemetry, surveillance footage. The 11-minute gap. When the emergency responder testified that earlier intervention might have changed the outcome, the room went still. Michael's lawyer objected. The judge overruled. I didn't react. I had already lived through the moment when that possibility became real. This was just its echo. Michael testified in his own defense. That was his mistake. He said he panicked. He said he didn't recognize the severity. He said he thought someone else would call. He never said my parents' names. That told me everything I needed to know. When the verdict came back guilty, there was no gasp, no outburst. Just the dull sound of consequence settling where arrogance used to live. Michael looked toward the gallery then. He saw me. For a moment, something crossed his face. Not remorse. Recognition. The understanding that I was no longer an obstacle, a rival, or a problem to solve. I was a witness. That was enough. I left before sentencing. Outside, the air felt lighter than it had in months. Not because justice had been served, but because the last illusion had fallen away. Andrew texted me that night. "It's over." I typed back, "No, it's finished." There's a difference. In the weeks that followed, the world kept moving. People asked how I felt. I gave them neutral answers, the kind that don't invite follow-up. What I felt wasn't dramatic. It was spacious. I had room to think about things that had nothing to do with survival. I started saying no without rehearsing. I stopped explaining my decisions. I made plans that didn't include contingencies. One afternoon, I hosted a small dinner. Just friends, chosen family. People who knew my story in pieces, not chapters. Someone raised a glass and said, "To resilience." I smiled, but I didn't drink to that. Resilience implies endurance of harm. What I wanted now was peace. Later that night, alone, I sat on the back steps and thought about how many years I'd spent trying to earn permanence, trying to prove I belonged, trying to be easy to keep. None of that had protected me. What protected me was clarity, boundaries, the willingness to be misunderstood. I realized something then that felt almost embarrassing in its simplicity. I hadn't won because I was smarter or tougher. I had won because I stopped participating in a system that required my silence to function. That's not revenge. That's exit. If you're listening to this and something in it feels familiar, pause for a second. Ask yourself who benefits when you stay quiet. Ask yourself who taught you that being loved meant being compliant. And if this story is hitting close to home, like it or not, say so. Subscribe if you want to hear what happens after the fight is over, the part nobody prepares you for. Because the end of conflict is not the end of growth. Sometimes it's the beginning of your first honest life. That was true for me, and it led me somewhere unexpected. People think the end of a story like this is the verdict. It isn't. The end is the morning you wake up and realize you're no longer organizing your life around damage control. For me, that morning came quietly. No announcement, no relief crashing over me. Just the simple awareness that my first thought wasn't about my brothers, the trial, or the house. It was about what I wanted to do that day. That felt unfamiliar enough to make me stop and sit with it. I kept the house, but I changed how I lived in it. Not to erase my parents, but to let the space breathe. I turned Jonathan's old workshop into a studio where I could think and build things that belonged only to me. I donated the dining set no one ever used. I framed photographs that had lived in boxes for years. I made the house reflect the present, not the conflict that once filled it. I also changed my name back professionally. Not out of anger, out of accuracy. I wanted my work to stand on its own history, not one inherited through tension and obligation. The consulting work expanded faster than I expected. Word travels quietly when you're consistent. I chose projects carefully. I turned down anything that felt extractive or performative. I had spent enough of my life being evaluated. I wasn't interested in proving anything anymore. The sentencing happened without me in the room. Michael received a prison term that matched the charge. It was covered briefly in the local paper. No photo, no editorial. Andrew sent one final message afterward. I hope you find happiness. I didn't respond, not because I was angry. Because happiness is not something you hand someone as reassurance. It's something you build when you stop asking permission. I saw a therapist for another few months, not to process trauma anymore, but to understand patterns. Why I'd stay quiet so long. Why I'd mistaken endurance for loyalty. She said something once that stayed with me. Being chosen isn't about someone else picking you. It's about not abandoning yourself when they don't. That became a kind of internal rule. I stopped returning calls that made my chest tighten. I let friendships fade if they required performance. I stopped explaining why I needed distance. The world didn't collapse. It adjusted. On the anniversary of Margaret and Jonathan's death, I didn't go to the cemetery. I didn't need to. I honored them by living in a way that reflected what they'd tried, imperfectly, to give me. Stability, choice, voice. That evening, I cooked dinner for myself and ate slowly at the kitchen counter. I opened the windows. I let the house fill with sound and air and ordinary life. I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who learned early that survival meant minimizing herself, the one who learned to read a room before speaking, the one who believed belonging was conditional. I wished I could tell her something. Not that it would all work out, but that one day she would stop mistaking endurance for love. I don't forgive my brothers. I don't need to. Forgiveness is optional. Clarity is not. What I have now isn't revenge. It isn't victory. It's alignment. My life makes sense to me. My choices don't require justification. I don't feel the need to be understood by people who never tried to understand me. That, more than anything else, feels like freedom. If you've made it this far, maybe some part of this story mirrors your own. Maybe you've been the quiet one, the adopted one, the tolerated one, the person who was expected to accept less because keeping the peace mattered more than your truth. If so, remember this. You don't need permission to protect yourself. You don't need to wait for validation to set boundaries. And you don't owe loyalty to people who only value you when you're convenient. If this story resonated, like it, comment, subscribe. Not because I need numbers, but because stories like this survive when they're shared. Silence protects systems that hurt people. Speaking ends them. This is where my story stops. But if you're listening, yours doesn't have to.